Hey, everybody, welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew Chris Bowen, Mike Simmons, Bryn Tillman, and Renee Bigelow. I just merged two of my favorite people into one.
If you're going to merge me with anyone, she's the one I picked. So good.
Oh, well, so welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And we're here on LinkedIn Live. And we are going to jump in today. We're going to talk about methodology because I think there's so much confusion about what does that mean? What are the different methodologies? What is sales methodology? How do we use it? How does it fit? Is it important? Why does my CRM have all these methodologies? I hear these questions all the time. So I thought let's kind of dig into this. And I'm gonna just give you a disclaimer, which I'm probably going to give several times today before we start, which is I have to be really upfront about the fact that I am Miller Hyman for obvious reasons, because my dad wrote those methodologies, but I was also raised in those methodologies and I built my system around it. So as we're talking about this stuff, I have to tell you I have a bias, and it's a reasonable bias, but it is my bias. So I just want to put that up front as we start talking about this. But we're going to talk about methodology. So we're going to, for those of you who join us on LinkedIn Live, you know that we're going to do 4 different podcast episodes while we're here together. And we're going to jump into the first one. And we're going to start by talking about why methodology. Like, what is it? Why do we need it? Were you going to say something, Red?
Yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to say something.
You're ready? Okay, wait. Let's start. Let's jump into. Let's do our intro for our first episode, and then we'll dive right in. And I'll introduce you guys all again because I feel like I need to do that a bunch of times. Okay, you ready? And if you're, by the way, if you're here with us live, please interact, say hello, ask questions. We want to hear from you and include you in our discussion. So let's get started. Hi, welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I'm here with your Sales SOS podcast crew. I don't know if I say this often enough, but we have an amazing crew of brilliant thought leaders that are here just to answer your questions. And so today we're going to be talking about methodology. And I think that the first question is, like, we talk about this is sales methodology. Like, oh, what sales methodology do you use? Or, how do I build sales methodology into my CRM? Like, people are talking about this, but I don't know if people really understand. What is sales methodology? Let's just start there. I don't know who wants to dig in. Bryn, did you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in because I think at a high level, sales methodology is really a structured framework or approach that's guiding sales reps or anyone in sales. It doesn't really even have to be a rep, right? Anyone, but the methodology is what's my guiding light? What are the steps throughout the sales process that I'm going to take? It's really how you sell. It's the philosophy behind how you sell, and it's the goal is that methodology is uncovering needs, it's building trust, it's bridging solutions in a scalable, repeatable way, right? So like at a high level, it's prospecting, discovery, proposal, overcoming objections, close at a high level. But then we get into specific methodologies like Miller Hyman and Spin and Sandler and Challenger, right? And we have one that's called Chirp. BANT is the old-fashioned sales methodology that should be buried, but besides the point. That's like at a high level. It's like, what is that step-by-step philosophy that's ingrained into process that is scalable and repeatable?
I think one thing to add to that, Bryn, is it gives you a common language to use internally when you're talking about deals, opportunities, process. Everybody now has a clean, clear understanding of exactly what you mean when you say we're in this stage, we're doing this, and it helps cut down some of the potential confusion because I've been in organizations where you have the same words for multiple different pieces of a process,
Mhm.
and it's not a great place to be if people are reading different definitions of what that role is or what that person's supposed to be doing or what that step is. So having a consistent way to communicate helps cut through a lot of the noise.
I'll add on to both of you by saying, Chris, you just presented why that consistency matters on the inside, but as usual, I'll just represent the customer here and say why that consistency matters a lot there. You may have account people move from, you may rearrange account territories, right? You may have people leave and come on. You may have a customer who was a new prospect who was a customer at another account who dealt with a different salesperson. So not coming across as schizophrenic, right? And how everybody has their own cowboy way of doing things, and having some sort of consistency is important for your brand, for customers to understand what to expect too.
Love that.
Mike, will you add any additional thoughts on what is it?
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges that comes up, and it's come up a couple of times as we've been talking, is definition. So, like, what's the difference between a system, a method, a process? Often these words get used combined, or interchanged with each other, and we'll talk about things like your BANT as a method or a methodology, and really it's a qualification framework. So like that's the focus of something like that, or medic or medpic or whatever other letter they want to add into it these days. They just keep adding these different pieces, and it's a qualification method or a qualification framework. It's not a process. Process means that something has to happen in a series, in an order of events, and we've talked about that in the past in some of our other stuff. Method, to Bryn's point, it's kind of, and the other points that were made up or discussed here, it's a how we do. It's like a culture almost. It's like how we do what we do. It's our state of being. It's how we operate. One of the most common methods that people are familiar with, or you could do a search for, if you go back into chemistry class way back when, is the scientific method, right? So you can apply the scientific method to testing something, having a hypothesis, going out and testing that hypothesis, taking your data and trying to either disprove a hypothesis, because depending on where you sit, you can never really prove anything. So that's how I think about this stuff. Methods, systems, processes, tools are all different things, but they get combined together. And the people who don't know how to design them or don't know how to pull them together or build them end up falling into the trap of thought leaders who are like, this is the one true ring to rule them all, which is what the medic chants people are all doing today. And I laugh at them. Anyway. So those are my 2.5 cents.
So let me just kind of pull together some different things that were said.
Thanks.
Common language, right? A common way of doing something, a way of following a series of steps that we can do repeatedly, right? And we can understand what kind of result we're going to get if we follow that process. It's a philosophy. A lot of methodologies have a philosophy behind them. And then it is also something that is manageable, right? So it's repeatable, it's manageable, it's a common language, it improves communication. So if you're talking about implementing methodology, if you're talking about we need methodology or we have methodology, one of the measures of whether it's working or how to make it work is to say, are we all speaking the same language? Are we all following the same process? When we talk about it, do we understand each other? Do we have certain guide rails that keep us on track? Can we manage it? Is it actually manageable? And I will tell you, when I started my career, and I know I've told you guys this story before, but this is really why I learned how important methodology is. I was 30 years old, and I had a sales organization of international independent consultants contractors who had been selling longer than I had been alive. And there was no way I was managing them. There was nothing this snot-nosed kid was going to tell them that they didn't already know. And so I learned really early on, I couldn't manage them, but I could manage a process. We all agreed to a process and we all followed the process. And so when I had conversations with them, I had conversations with them around the funnel and conversations with them around the process and the buying influences and all of the things that we taught and agreed to. And I was able to manage that team successfully and take them from a negative $200,000 in a year to $1 million in a year. And so, when you have that and you're really all, doing it together, talking the same language, managing in the same way, then you have something to work with. When you don't, you have chaos, which is of course my favorite. Oops, I just got muted, which is my favorite word when it comes to sales, right? Because most of it is just chaotic. So if that's the basis of what a methodology is. So then let's talk about why do you need one? Like, aside from that, like, how do you pick one? What do they do exactly? And I think there's different ones we all talk about. So maybe we can talk about the different roles they play.
I think the first thing you have to determine is, what does a typical sales cycle look like before you pick? Like Miller Heiman, I think, is the greatest process for a complex sale. But if you're selling a $197 widget, Miller Heiman is the wrong process, right?
Overkill.
Right. And that's where you go to maybe Sandler. No, probably never. But whatever. Like,
if Bryn, if you diss Sandler, they're never going to sponsor us.
Okay.
I'm okay with that.
Well, can I just, I know that I just have to state this. I was Sandlerized, and it was so uncomfortable, where the upfront contract, I just want to say, and you guys out there that are doing it, it's working for you, great, enjoy. But I felt like a victim of this. And this upfront contract was literally, okay, so we're setting this appointment. Is there any reason you're not going to attend? And I'm like, I'm a big girl. If I'm setting this appointment, if you really believe that you have to double and triple clarify so I don't stand you up, you've got to give me value and a reason to show up, not a threat. So I just want to share that. Okay. And it just closes me down. So yeah, go ahead.
But Bryn, if we don't have a mutual action plan, how do we know that we're aligned on what we're going to do together?
I don't even know what we're going to do when you have me in all these little commitments, and I don't even know what you do yet. I don't even know the value you're going to bring yet. I have no idea. I mean, it's like, so, and I'm going to share one of the reasons I moved I have this methodology from BANT to CHIRP, and BANT is budget, authority, needs, and timing. That's all as a seller. What I want to get out of it. What do I need? And the buyer isn't in that at all. What they need and want.
Now, Daryl loves to talk about being banted, right? He hates being banted.
It's awful. It's awful. And that's all this, it's a transactional mindset, and it's about me making the sale, not about you getting a problem solved. So I
look at it. I agree with you, by the way. So before I say this, but there are pieces of BANT that are semi-okay, right? But I tend to look at some of it doesn't matter. Like, if you solve a real problem, budget will be found. So what do you care if there's budget for this today? Do you solve a real problem for that business? If you do, and they recognize that problem and it's above the line, they'll find money for it. Authority can matter, but it depends on the organization. Need is probably the part of it that actually does matter. And then timing, I always look at, and I said this till I'm blue in the face so many times, there's nothing you can do from a timing perspective. Customers buy on their own timeline for their own reasons. All you can do is say, if you need to get this done by December 31st, then this is when you have to get started. I can highlight what they have to do in order to get there, but I'm not going to change their timing because I'm going to offer a discount or whatever it happens to be. Their timing's their timing. So
I agree with that. And timing really comes down to priority.
Yep.
Right. And so that's where, I mean, I'm just going to throw out the chirp, which is something new that I just love, which is, what is the challenge? What is the history with that challenge inside of the company? What have they done before? What hasn't worked? Why is it still a challenge? What risk is there if they don't fix this challenge? What impact is on that person if they don't fix this challenge? And is this even a priority? So I think when you move in, now it's about them instead of about us. What's the impact for them? Then eventually we'll get into BANT right after we've identified what matters to them. And so anyway, I think having so the question initially that was put out there was methodology, right? Why have a methodology? And the reason you have a methodology is to take you through all the things that they need and we need to determine if there's an opportunity here. And then once we've determined there's an opportunity here, what are the processes to get it to execution? So that's why we need a methodology, but we have to make sure that the methodology aligns to, is it a complex sale? Is it a simple sale? Is it a one close sale? Is it a 17-person decision? How long is the sales cycle? And then you can determine what methodology is right for you. Okay, I'm done. That's my rant on BANT.
So let me jump in for a second, because what I want to talk about for a minute is that different methodologies solve different problems. And there are some methodologies, like if you go to an entire philosophy, you might have different pieces that cover different parts. But when we start talking about philosophy, when we start talking about methodologies, we start thinking about, well, this one really helps with the qualifying process. So like BANT is a qualifying criteria. And I always say it's BANT, because you have to have the F in there, because they may have a need, but if it's not a fit, you got nothing. But so that's a qualifying. Medic really started just as qualifying. They've added some other pieces, but it solves a qualifying problem, right? Others are more tactical. How do I interact with my client? How do I have conversations with them? That would be more like a spin or a challenger. But then there's others that are more strategic, and like Challenger has a strategic component. Miller Hyman is famous for the strategic selling component. So when we start thinking about methodology, we need to figure out what problem we need to solve and what methodology or sets of methodologies are going to work for us. So if we go to Miller Hyman, if we did that, and I got to do this just because this is what I'm most familiar with, it's all about strategy. But one is a meeting strategy, one is an opportunity or a deal strategy, and one is a large account strategy. Those are all strategies that incorporate within them philosophy, questioning, right? So there's a bunch of stuff built into them. So that is one of the more complete methodologies, but it doesn't have a clear qualifying process in it, right? There's nothing in Miller Hyman that tells you exactly how to qualify. So, right, each of them solves different problems. And if you're having a problem, you need to start thinking about what exactly is the problem you're trying to solve. And I'm going to pass it back over. It looked like Chris and Mike both have things to share.
If they're not ready, I have one thing I want to add to what you said, Liz. I agree that you have to think about what problems you're trying to solve for, to know what methodology works for you, because they each do different things. But even a step before that, I think what Bryn said about how she felt about different methodologies when she was forced into them, right? You need to make sure it fits your culture. It fits your values of your organization, right? So I think that's like step one. Does this fit our values? Does this fit our culture? Step two, what are the problems we're trying to solve? And you have to think pretty universally, because your problems today may not be your problems in 90 days, much less a year or 3 years, right? And this is something that you're selling a system, you're selling a methodology. That's like, that's it's deeper than like a task process, right? You're trying to get people to build a belief in something, that this works, this is the right way to do something. So it's more permanent than these are the way we're gonna these are the steps we're gonna do, the workflow steps we're gonna do, right? So I think those pieces are really important. And then step three, I think you guys would have a better word for this, but I would say however how much you need to scale and standardize is like the next step of that. If you know you're going to be hiring and growing over a period of time, you're scaling in some form, then I think it's really important to think about a methodology that grows with you, right? If you know that you're mostly dealing with a set amount and low turnover, then you have a different criteria to work with. So to me, when you're really faced with which one of these do I do, I really feel like our team needs something. Those are like the first three steps I would consider.
Yeah, I think Renee, on top of that, I would sit there and say, depending on what type of market that you're trying to approach. So if you were like a SaaS company who's segmented from commercial to mid to enterprise, and you're trying to use the same methodology for all of those, you're going to do it wrong because they're different. They're different sales cycles. They're different processes, and the buyers are different. And so if you don't understand that interplay between your process, how your customers buy, and how that overlays, you're probably going to end up making a lot of mistakes in how you execute and how your team executes, which is going to lead to a lot of frustration, probably a fair amount of turnover, and that's going to create a fairly negative cycle, I think, within your business. So,
very good addition. Look at you thinking of the customer point of view. We just did role reversal.
Mike, you want to add?
It's like I haven't been doing this for over a year with you.
We could speak for each other.
There's a quote out there, and I had to look it up so I got it right, but it's methods are many, principles are few. So there are a lot of methods out there. In the absence of having a method inside your organization that you're following, build one or find one based on the specific problem that you're looking to solve at the point in time, not next year's problem or 10 years down the road. And that, because over time your methods are going to shift and change depending on what you see happen inside the market. One of the challenges that I think we've all seen happen is when a high performing sales rep gets promoted into a sales leadership role. And then you find out that person, although they had their own internal process that they followed or internal method that they followed, doesn't necessarily translate over to each of the other people that are inside the business. And then sometimes you lose people inside the business, or you try to hire to fit that method. So if you're thinking about this, here's the order of operations that I would suggest. Number one, if you don't have a method, start thinking about this, like was being told or discussed, the specific problem that you're looking to solve in the short term, and apply a method to help solve for that. When you do have methods in place, then start to study those methods, which gets into this methodology thing, the study of methods, and start to figure out, what do you want to change? What do you want to do different? How do you want to shift things? Methods give you the flexibility for a team to operate like themselves inside a system. They're not as prescriptive as process. These things have to happen in this specific order. And when you stop or something falls back, you've got to you go backward and then you repeat and go in that same order. That's why you get predictability in process. There's no predictability or there's less predictability in method, from my perspective. But that's what I would add there. There's a lot of different methods out there, and you will not have any shortage of new ones that you can apply. But if you're changing your methods every other week, you're in trouble.
I will say that's one of the things that we used to talk about a lot back in my Miller Hyman days, which was the companies that had the flavor of the month. We're going to do a new sales training this year. Which one shall we do? Okay, let's do a different one next year. Which one shall we do? And so the salespeople pick up a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and maybe it makes them better sellers. But the ones that we watched be super successful were companies like Coca-Cola and Hewlett-Packard and, a handful of others, many others, that actually built it into their culture. Every single sales rep that ever joined the company went through those programs. The leaders were taught to manage around it. The language was built into not just what the tools that the salespeople use, but what marketing and everybody else used. And so I think it's important when you're thinking about methodology, are you doing training or are you implementing a methodology across your organization that's going to have long-term impact? And if you just need a training, then go get a training. That's fine. But understand that's different than implementing a methodology or even a philosophy. Okay. Any last thoughts on this? In our next episode, we're going to talk about, what should you expect from your sales teams? Like, how do you actually get a sales team doing this? What should they be doing? How should the managers get involved? Do we have anything we want to talk about before we jump into that next episode?
So the only thing is I just put in a prompt that people can throw into their favorite LLM that should walk, if you don't know where to start, like put that in and it's going to interview you and it might help. It's completely agnostic and it's all based on the research that the LLM will do once you answer those questions. So, and it'll compare opportunities for you. So I just put that. I don't see if it's coming in through. I did it in LinkedIn, in under the live stream.
It did not come up, Bryn.
Okay, so I will.
Why don't you say it anyway? Why don't you kind of give us?
Okay, so I'll walk through it. So I want to evaluate and select a sales methodology that aligns with my team's selling style, cycle, deal complexity, and buyer behavior. The goal is to improve consistency, coaching, qualification, and win rates without making the process feel robotic or rigid. Your role, meaning the AI's role, is to act as a thought partner, asking me smart questions, surfacing trade-offs, and ultimately guiding me toward a methodology or blend that fits our real-world sales motion. I want to identify a sales methodology or combination of approaches that fits our team's strengths, supports consultative selling. You don't need to do that if you don't want that to be, and drives better outcomes and overcomplicating the process. A short list sales methodologies that could align with my sales team, and I have a side-by-side comparison chart, including ideal use cases, sales cycle length, number of decision makers, and type of rep it suits best, a simple diagnostic to help me evaluate fit, and optional recommendations for hybrid approaches or when to break the rules. Don't assume one size fits all. Don't default to legacy models just because they're popular. Ask me one question at a time to help me tailor this to my team.
So I just want to say to everybody, that was a lot, but I'm guessing that if you find, hopefully you have connected with all of us on LinkedIn. If you have not, please connect with all of us, but send Bryn a note that just says, hey, will you send me that prompt for picking a sales methodology? And I bet you she will do that.
I will.
All right. Thanks for joining us for this episode, everybody. Okay. Our next episode, we're going to talk about what should you expect from your sales team, especially if you have either failure or false starts before. Okay. Are you guys ready? Okay, wait. Oops. What did I just do? I was going to put that in the other chat. Control copy. Hang on just a second, everybody. Okay. All right. I just put Bryn's link in the, is that what I was supposed to do, Bryn? Share that with everybody?
That's the link to my comment.
Great. Okay. All right. Are you guys ready for the next episode? All right. Hang on. Let me get us all on together. And let me put, I don't care if I'm in the top. Okay. Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I'm here with your Sales SOS podcast crew, these incredible sales and marketing experts who are here to answer your questions. And today we're talking about sales methodology. If you missed the last episode, go back and listen to that, because we were talking about what is sales methodology. And in this segment, we're going to talk a little bit about how do you implement a sales methodology. And as we're talking about it, we may refer to one or another different sales methodologies, but really what we're trying to get to is, once you've decided that you want to implement a sales methodology, what do you expect from your team? How do you make this happen? What do you have to do? How do you reinforce? So I'm gonna put Chris on the hot seat here, because I think he has some really good thoughts about how to get started. Did I introduce you guys?
The first time.
Okay, well, let me just introduce your crew to you. This is Chris Bowen, that's highlighted here, and Renee Bigelow, and Bryn Tillman, and Mike Simmons. I can't remember what I've done from episode to episode. Thanks for joining us.
So I know I think when you start to look at what methodology you're picking, or why you're picking it, or what you need to first understand what's that going to mean to those individual sellers, to those leaders, and just as you have to with prospects and customers, you have to be able to find what's in it for them, right? Why is it that they need this process, or why is it that the company needs this process? Sometimes I do a lot in the services side. You're going to end up in a situation where we're making hiring projections for what we're going to bring on from staff and things like that based on where we're at with different deals in our pipeline, because we're trying to be as responsive as we can to our customers. So that's one of the things that you have to look at. But you also have to look at, how do I make sure that I know when things are going off the rails, when things are progressing as they should. I think we've all encountered stale pipelines that, the what I call the ever slipping deal. It slips from this quarter, then at the end of next quarter, it slips, and then it slips again. And if you have the right methodology or the right process, hopefully you have the tools to be able to ask the right questions, so you can uncover, is that real, right? Because my first thought is almost always, that's not real. It may sound real. You may be having conversations. You may be having good conversations, but it feels like the person that's on the other end of that conversation is more your friend than they are your customer. And I'm not saying those two things are necessarily always separate, but in this case, they're not the same. So you need to make sure you know what you're doing and how you're doing it, and then what pieces. If you take a methodology, are there pieces of that methodology that may not fit your organization? So maybe you have to adapt them. You have to adjust. You have to make sure that how am I now going to change this, because it either doesn't work for us, doesn't work for our process, doesn't work for our buyers, doesn't match our culture. Just because it's a methodology doesn't mean you have to accept it wholesale. Like, you understand your business better than any methodology is going to. It's automatically genericized to a degree. So that's my first thought. And it looks like Bryn's got her hand up.
Thank you. That was awesome, by the way. I have a 7-step onboarding to make sure, and it works for the LinkedIn program, but I think it works here. So we start with the why. Why are we doing this? Why? Like, you've got to get that Simon Sinek why in first. Because if they don't understand why we're making this change, why we're bringing in a new methodology, the adoption is low. The second thing I believe is make sure that you co-create, don't dictate. When you dictate, this is what we're doing, your sales folks are going to get their backs up and go, I don't like that. I don't like the way that sounds. But when they are part of bringing this new methodology in, you're going to get a much higher buy-in. We also need to connect it to reality. A lot of times we will roll something out and it will be detached from what they're experiencing in the field or they're experiencing on the phone. And so they're going to say, that's not going to work. It's not going to work. I know, I've been doing this for 3 years. It's just not going to work. So we have to make sure that we've got that bridge. We also need to make sure it's coachable. If we cannot create a methodology that we can't help them improve in. So the methodology we bring in needs to come with the right KPIs that align with what we're looking to get out of this methodology and make sure that it's coachable. We need to celebrate small wins very quickly. When someone implements it, we need to say, big win, even in the small wins, right? We've got to make sure we're doing that to get that the buy-in. I keep saying buy-in, but that's really what it is, buy into this new methodology. We need to integrate it, don't stack it on as new. And this is the biggest thing that I need to do from a LinkedIn perspective, because the number one objection I get from sales folks is, I don't have time to put this into my day. I don't have time for another thing. How do you think I'm going to get LinkedIn along with my emails and my phone calls and my meetings and my this? I don't have time for LinkedIn. So I believe that this also fits with the methodology, is it has to seamlessly integrate with what they're already doing. Don't make it more, right? Make it integrated so it flows naturally. And the last one is each rep needs to be able to tailor it to their perspective on things without it breaking the system, so that they own, and they may say, hey, if I say it like this, is this keeping the integrity of the methodology? Because I'm more comfortable saying this. Like for me, I will always say, if you're open to exploring, let's chat. Well, I have someone on my team that doesn't like if you're open to exploring. They want to say, I've got some ideas for you. If you'd like to know those ideas, let me know, we'll chat. Well, that is completely integrated into what we do. It's fine. They can go do it that way. I can do it my way without it contradicting each other. So just recap that. Start with the why, co-create, don't dictate, connect it to reality, make sure it's coachable, celebrate the small wins, integrate, don't stack, and make it tailorable. Okay, I'm done now.
I have a bunch of things that I want to like clarify and kind of reiterate. One is, in the last episode, when we were talking about what is a methodology, Mike gave us a bunch of explanations about methods and methodology. We talked about philosophy. Again, listen to it. It was a really great way to think about all this. But I want to take us back to this idea. Bryn, without saying it, was talking about playbooks, right? So she didn't use the word playbook, but she was talking about, this is what you do. This is our playbook. And I want to differentiate for you the difference between a methodology that you map out in a playbook versus a script. So you may have a script as part of your playbook, but a playbook isn't necessarily a script. A playbook may be a set of rules, a set of steps, a bunch of ideas about what you might do at a different time. When I create a sales process that aligns with the sales funnel in the methodology that I teach, I want to make sure that when you're prospecting, if you're in that stage, these are the kinds of activities that you'll be doing. And these are the kinds of questions that you'll be asking. I don't necessarily say you have to ask this question in some way. In some companies, they do say you need to ask this question in this way. And so if you are a salesperson picking where you want to work, be thoughtful about that. And if you're a sales manager and you have a salesperson who says, I'm just not comfortable saying that, and I'm gonna hopefully not upset anybody when I say this, often those sales playbooks are written by men, or you're using a tool like Gong, which is pulling more information from what men say because there's more men in sales. And then you often have women who will say, it doesn't work for me when I say it like that. I say this. And so we want to be really thoughtful, again, about the difference between what is a playbook, what is a methodology, what is a script, and when are scripts appropriate. And Chris is chomping at the bit here. What do you want to tell me?
No, I agree with you. I mean, my thing is I personally don't like scripts. I like, if you're going to tell people, what are we trying to get out from this particular portion of the process or where we're at, that's great. How you and give them examples that could look like scripts, but let them put it in their own language, in their own words. They're going to come across as much more authentic, much more real than if you give them a script. At least 50% of your people are going to sound like a robot, and who wants to interact with that? If you're going to be putting it forward, what are we trying to understand? What is it that we need to get out of it? What is it that we want to convey to our potential buyers? And then you all can workshop different ideas around, here's how I would approach that. Here's what I've had success with when you have your team meetings and things like that. Here's what's not working. Someone else will have a different idea. A lot of times these things aren't 180 degrees apart from the way that one person says it versus another. They're 10, 15 degrees, little minor adjustments here and there. But the way that someone says, you can have two people that say the exact same thing, they say it in slightly different ways, and one of those is going to more resonate with somebody than another. So that's how I tend to look at those things when you get into scripting is you got to own it. And the only way you're going to own it is if it's the way that you communicate.
Can I jump in on this one for just a second, Liz?
Hang on a second.
Oh, sure.
There you go.
I just wanted to say, I think that there's a misnomer around scripts, right? There are definitely some people who say, this is what you say and do not deviate from it. This is important. I think we need to set them aside because we know that that's not the best practice, right? A script is putting a pattern in front of someone to help them to go from 0 to 1, right? To get them from, I don't know how to think about this, to, okay, now I kind of know what I'm supposed to do. Let me do my thing, right? It is a pattern that you are giving them. Where I think a lot of tension comes up is if you dictate, right? Number one. Yep. And to your point, Chris, it's incredibly hard to come across as an authentic person if you are reading a script someone else wrote for you, right? Very few people are Oscar-winning actors who can pull that off and not sound inauthentic. So that's tension number one. Tension number two is if you aren't clear on what is non-negotiable to change and what is negotiable to change. It might be as simple as we have a promotion, right? And you qualify for a discount if whatever those if terms are non-negotiable. Like you do need to know what those are and they're written in because we've set guidelines for it, right? But how you talk about it and how you introduce it and things like that is fully customizable. We've just given you a really good example that you can run from, right? And I think that so many people get like on scripts because of the small minority of people who dictate this is exactly how you have to do it. And they're a very important part of a playbook because when a sales rep is super busy or new or green or hasn't done this before, whatever you want to choose, right? They can sit and look at it and have something to start with instead of having to spend 30 minutes to figure out what they're supposed to say. You just have to clarify on script.
Absolutely understand that. So I would say if you look at our business, we sell essentially everything under the sun. But if I'm talking to someone who's looking to replace things in their data center from a hardware perspective versus a solution perspective, is very different than cybersecurity professionals manning a NOC, which is very different than implementing something like Salesforce or SAP or any other packaged solution versus custom development. The way you talk about all those things is very, very different. So a playbook can get you up to speed on what are the main things, what are the main values that we have here, what are the artifacts that we have internally that differentiate us from the plethora of competition that's out there, and then being able to deal with it that way.
I think it's the difference between saying, here's the list of questions you must ask in this order, mm-hmm. and every single one must get asked, versus here's the information that you need to get in order for us to be able to develop a solution. And here are some ways that you might ask those questions, right? Those are two different things. They get a different result from a salesperson.
And really understanding where in the process is it that I have to have that information. Because a lot of times when you see people setting up CRMs, some of the information they think you're going to have on an initial opportunity is inappropriate for that part of the process. You might have it some of the time, but most of the time you're not. Like if you're having ongoing conversations, by the time we get to, if we have a 5-step process, by the time we get to step 3 in that process, we do need to have these things because we've now decided we're committing resources to this thing semi-substantially, right? So being able to understand where it is that we have to have the information is really important. And so methodology can help you make sure that you're sussing some of that stuff out.
So let's talk a little bit more about building methodology into CRM, because this is one of the ways that we reinforce methodology with our team. When we have the language built into the CRM that we're using, either in the pipeline, in the different stages, some CRMs will pop up at different times and give you suggested questions to ask. So as we're thinking about this is when we start thinking about which methodology am I implementing where. So if we're talking about tactical, how do I engage? How do I use, then you would use something like a spin or a challenger or a Sandler, where they're telling you how to engage and how to ask questions. And if you are using one of those methodologies, then you build that into the CRM to give your salespeople prompts to guide them. Again, does that mean that they have to ask every single question that's on the list in exactly the way that it's written and have your clients just go, for goodness sake, I answered that 6 times. You just asked the question differently. I gave you all of it, right? You don't want your customer doing that. But you can, if you have chosen a methodology for engagement, how do we engage? How do we interact? You can build that into the system and then reinforce that with your salespeople. And then what Grim was talking about, managing, then you know what kinds of questions, what kind of engagement you want them to have, and you can manage around those. Now, I am not going to say you need to use Spinner, you need to use, I'm going to say, oh, if you want to know how to do that, use conceptual selling and strategic selling. But you need to pick the one that's right for your, and we're going to talk more about that, choosing the right methodology. But how do you reinforce it? How do you build it in is really important. Mike, did you have a thought on this?
Yeah, I'll just summarize a couple of things I heard. One, integrating into workflow is a key piece, and being really clear around the work that needs to be done and the results you want to get. If you know those kind of things, if you can integrate into workflow, know what work needs to be done and the results you're looking for, you'll be on the path to do this really, really well. The hard part is knowing those things.
I think it's also really important to remember that when you're implementing a methodology, there is some change management that has to happen. And unless you share it with everybody, like if accounting is using a different language than sales, then you're having miscommunication. If the sales managers aren't asking the questions that tie in specifically to how you said you were going to do this, then you're going to have miscommunication and frustration, and your salespeople aren't going to do it. If you bring your salespeople in to report to the CEO and the CEO is using a different language, you're going to have a problem. So if you are implementing a methodology and a language and a way of communicating, you need to make sure that the entire company understands how you are going to speak around sales opportunities and engagement. Any other thoughts on how to implement it, what to expect from your sales team, how to get them doing it? Because I see, I'm gonna let you speak. I see people bringing it in and then the salespeople refusing to use the language, right? You see stuff like this where they're just, so how do you, Renee, share with us what you were going to say before I
I
said
was just going to say, you were talking about change management. I mean, anytime you're bringing in a new methodology, like you have change management that goes with it. And I know that gets like everybody's eyes roll when they hear change management, right? A little bit of a pause or whatever. But one of the big things I do in marketing to help with messaging, right, for external audiences is also really relevant for marketing to internal audiences. First of all, treat doing something like this as a campaign to your staff. Put some planning into it and treat it like a campaign. Make sure you have frequency of messaging. Make sure you're reaching them in different ways, right? All of the same basic fundamentals that you would do for an external campaign. Make sure you're planning those on an internal campaign. In making sure that you're also hitting, the emotional levers that make people want to buy in. Find your champions that can be your spokespeople, people who already do a lot of these things naturally or have used it in the past. Let them tell some of the stories of success, right? So if you start thinking about it like a marketing campaign, then you start thinking about ways that you're going to get people to naturally want to come along, right? You aren't forcing people, or you aren't successfully often forcing people into things in a marketing campaign to get them to convert to revenue. You're doing the same principles apply for getting internal people to do the things that you want. And I would say another big piece of marketing, particularly like in a B2B environment, which relates very well to internal teams, is shrink the change. So if you have this entire methodology and you can roll out a portion of it, as you pointed out, breaking down the problems into different areas. If your biggest problem is qualifying leads, right? And your methodology has something for qualifying leads and a whole bunch of other stuff, just focus on that part to start. Like find somewhere where you can shrink the change and get consensus rather than trying to rock everybody's world with all the things. The movie title, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once, is now my new catchphrase for all the chaos that people like to change, like to create from change, right? Everything, everywhere, all at once doesn't really work. So shrink the change.
Thanks, Renee. That was, I think that's really important. This how we implement the change really matters. Okay, well, let's wrap up this episode unless anybody has anything additional to add about how you implement it, how to reinforce it. Gamification is always a good thing, right?
That goes to that frequency and thinking about it like a marketing campaign, right? Like, how do you make it fun? That's the emotion. How do you make it fun? How do you reward people for good behavior? Make sure that you're showcasing them. The frequency of bringing it up, all of that goes into thinking about it as a long-term campaign, not just, well, we rolled that out last month. I don't understand why they aren't doing it. We explained it once.
Yes. Okay, so thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. In our next episode, we're going to talk more about methodology. So I hope you'll hear us, or you'll join us there, and we'll see you just on the other side. Okay, we're going to talk about picking one and evaluating them. So let's dive in a little bit more in this next episode to that. Bryn, you good? All right. Let's see if I can launch this one right this time. And again, if you're with us, if you're joining us on LinkedIn Live, please chime in, share your thoughts. Okay. Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I am here with your Sales SOS podcast crew. Let me share it so you can see everybody. We've got Renee Bigelow, Chris Bowen, Bryn Tillman, and Mike Simmons. And we've been talking in these last couple episodes about methodology, sales methodology. So if you missed the last two, please join us there and understand a little bit more about what methodology is and how to begin to implement it with your team. How do you pick though? There's all these methodologies. How do you pick the one that you're going to go ahead and implement with your team? And I want to say, one of the things that I hear a lot is, well, there's MedPick language in my CRM. Should I just do that? Or, there's Sandler language, or there's Miller Hyman, all the Miller Hyman buyers are in my CRM. Should I use that? Or sometimes I see people using all of the different crazy language from all of the different methodologies, which Salesforce and HubSpot have made an entire list of different kinds of buyers that meet all these different methodologies, and people are so confused. So with all of these choices out there, how do I pick the one that's right for my team? And if you guys want to talk a little bit specifically about the different methodologies, that's okay. If you just want to talk about what are the steps, Bryn gave us a great prompt in in 2 episodes ago about having AI help you pick your methodology. But let's just talk about how do you pick? How do you start?
I just want to piggyback onto what you said, Liz, and just share, because I think a lot of people are going to recognize that and be kind of quiet about it. The number one thing I see out there is not one. It's a blend of methodologies, right? Like you could call it Frankenstein, or you could call it a blend. I choose to go with blend because people can figure out they're grown-ups and they can find the places that work best for them. But I just think it's important to recognize as a reality that it's very, very rare to see pure methodology these days. A lot
So,
of people have pieces, parts that different people have brought in.
so they're chimera methodology. Okay, so where do we start? Who wants to start? Bryn, you want to start?
I mean, I just go through kind of my thinking around this, right? We've got to define our sales cycle. What does it look like? Again, I mentioned this before, but it's really about, do I have a complex sales cycle? Do I have a simple sales cycle?
Okay, wait, stop. Complex sale, simple sale. What are you talking about?
Okay, so a simple sale often,
because we're not talking about hard or easy, right?
Correct.
We're talking about complex versus simple. So let's not go. What does that mean?
So a complex sale is going to be many conversations. There are more people involved. Yeah, let me.
It might change, make a significant change in your organization, the buying organization, right? Long sales cycle.
Right. So it's right. Short sales cycle. Good. Short sales cycle versus long. Low cost or low risk versus high cost, high risk. Few decision makers versus many. Is it product focused or solution focused, right? Is there a little bit of education or no education needed? Do they know what they're buying, or is there a more education needed around that? Is it a click to buy subscription, or is it, a much, like a enterprise software implementation where IT has to get involved? Is it high ticket solution? I think, so yes.
Thank
you.
Did
I hit it?
You did everything I would include anyway.
Okay, cool.
Okay, so when you're picking, you said one of the first things is to think about what whether it's complex sale or simple sale.
Okay, yes, right. So defining that sales cycle, understanding your buyers and who you're talking to matters before am I talking to someone in procurement, or am I talking to a CFO, or am I, who is my buyer, and what are the challenges they're facing, and what do I need to uncover? Are they challenges they're comfortable sharing, or are they going to hold those close to the vest? Right? We've got to understand that. We've got to understand the internal gaps, right? What are the gaps internally that we have to, I guess I'm back to uncovering, right? Like, what are those things? So if we're in a sales cycle, and we're in a methodology, do we need deep discovery, or is it shallow discovery? Like, what and how much research do we need to do in advance, and how much can we show up and figure it out, right? Like, there's a lot of those little nuances. Then we have to assess, our team strengths and styles, evaluate what our tools in our CRM looks like. How are we capturing the discovery, I think, is a big piece of this. I'm so not prepared, but I have like all these things going through my head. And then understanding what methodologies are available to us and map them what matches. Okay. That's my off the cuff answer.
That's great. So Bryn has launched this discussion. Mike, Chris, do you want to jump in on how to pick?
I was going to say, Bryn took one for the team to go first to try to do it all off the cuff.
Right. Now we get to we have a starting place.
And I'm totally fine if I said things that are not right and you're like, no, Bryn, that's wrong, because I'm totally open to that. So don't hold back.
On the piece between simplifying and complexity, or simple and complex, I think one of the things that's helped me when working with people and kind of working through this is just getting the definition of each. So like, what is complex? Like, let's give an example of something that's complex. So if I fold up a paper airplane with a couple of folds on it, that's pretty simple and it can move through time and space. If I get one of those balsa wood with rubber band propeller kind of airplanes that you might have had as a kid, it has 7 pieces to it. Depending on which one you get, you twist the rubber band and it can fly through time and space, and it can do it a little bit faster, but it's more complex. If I get a drone, which the kids are playing with now, that's going to have more pieces to it. It can fly through time and space, and it's going to be a little bit more complex. It has more parts to it. If I want to get on a Cessna that can fly a person, it's going to have more parts. It's going to be a bit more complex. We can go all the way up to rocket ships. Unfortunately, many of you in your businesses want the rocket ship and you don't know how to operate a paper plane. So let's first figure out what does it take to operate the paper airplane. So if complexity happens when we add layers to things, then the way that we simplify is by reducing. So what can we do? And this is where engineering can really help. What can we do to engineer a better solution and start to reduce complexity, pull things away, pull all of the unnecessary things away so that we can create a really simple process. So as it applies to the sales side, which is what Bryn was talking about, when you add in new variables, new people, buyers, influencers, people who are impacted, procurement, whoever, you keep adding new humans into the loop, you're going to increase complexity. If you're going to add in different stages, you're going to increase complexity. If you're going to add in different checklists that you have to do, you're going to increase complexity. So I think this is an Einstein thing, but it's as simple as possible, but no simpler, right? So, it's as simple as possible, complex as necessary. So that's how I like to think about this whole simple versus complex piece. And when you start to, whether it's paper airplanes or riding a bike and then a motorcycle and then a car, or working through other models that we're familiar with, people will start to realize, oh, okay, I see the difference between simple and complex. And then when RevOps gets involved and leadership gets involved and they want to add all of the cool things that they can add into the CRM, now you realize why your sales team hates you and has no interest in using the tool that's available, because you've created so much complexity with this, I think was discussed before, this Frankenstein of methods that are applied in context. So that's how I think of simple and complex, and help people break things down into smaller parts, deconstruct and solve for the necessary items.
I'll just add, paper plane is way less expensive than a rocket ship too. So cost goes into those.
So,
Yes.
so let's talk about for a second, though. Oh, hang on, Chris. Let me just clarify. My process, what Mike was saying, is my sales process has to match my buyer's journey. So I can't just say, well, we're going to do it in one phone call, regardless of the fact that my buyer has 15 buyers that have to be involved in this, right? My selling process has to match my buyer journey. And I have to tell you, Renee Bigelow taught me this. So if I'm creating a sales process, the complexity of the process I create must match the complexity of the buyer's journey. So one of the things that we see that's an example of how this doesn't work in many organizations is a sales process that says we have a first call, we have a demo, we have a proposal, and then we close, which is fine if you have a simple sale, meaning one person talks to you, does a demo, maybe talks to somebody else, you look at the proposal, they buy it, or they buy it for a handful of people. That is a simple sale, and it doesn't require a much more complex sales process than that. Now, if in fact there are 10 buyers, which is what Gartner says, there's about 10 buyers involved in a complex sale, somewhere between 10 and 15. And the first person who comes to me comes and says, I want to see a demo and I would like a proposal. And then they take that back to the buying organization. And then that buying organization then begins to add more details and ask more questions. And then they come back and different people want a demo and the proposal needs 3 or 4 revisions. Suddenly your very simple buying process does not match the complexity of the purchase that's happening. And so your team cannot understand What is the real length of time that's going to take, and what are the steps and who's involved? And so this is what we mean by understanding the difference between a sales process that works with a complex versus a simple sale. And as Chris said before, and I know he's got something to say, as Chris said before, you may have 2 different buying processes or 3 based upon the complexity of what it is you're selling and how many people are involved in that. So Chris, what you got for us?
Well, no, I think obviously the difference between simple and complex is really important. I think you also have to be able to understand who's involved on the customer side in that sale. Because if I'm talking to a CFO, but maybe the what I'm selling really is more of a COO organization sort of buy, they care about different things. There's some overlap. There is a Venn diagram there that works, but there's also a whole other universe of things that only the financial organization really, really cares about and understands. And you need to use the right language and the right way that you're approaching them in that. And it's hard to get that stuff into a methodology, right? But you have to be able to understand where are the parts that I'm looking for that to happen, and where are the parts where I know that, hey, if we get to this point, it's going to be 90 days before we're able to do really the next step, whatever it happens to be. Maybe it's because we have to negotiate an MSA, and we know that these organizations take 90 days on average to negotiate that MSA. So anybody who comes in and says, oh, I'm at this step and we're going to have this MSA in 30 days, you can, as a leader, you can probably question, okay, do you know that? Is that what they're telling you? Have you done that at this particular organization before? Or are you just using your past experience with something that may have been a little bit simpler? So I think you have to have an understanding, even within your methodology, of what do you think, I'll say, and this is going to be quote unquote, ideal flow is between each one of those different phases of your methodology. And then what are the things that indicate outliers, both on the short side as well as the long side? Because the long side could indicate this isn't a real deal. The short side may end up are there places where we need to streamline our system for those types of sales?
And so I just want to put into this how the design of our methodology and how we implement it takes this into account. So if we have a methodology that is an engagement or a tactical methodology, and it tells us the series of questions to ask and how to respond, right? If we have that fits into a certain format and may live in the CRM, because you may have a call plan template in the CRM that you use to plan for meetings and to go through a meeting engagement. If you have a complex business to business sell, then your CRM needs to be designed in such a way that you can track that different information about the different buyers. So if you go back to a Miller-Hyman methodology, which again, for those of you who don't know, my dad wrote strategic selling. I was raised in the Miller-Hyman. I was washed in the blood. This is what this is how I built my system. So forgive me for being a bit biased, but the thing that was cool about the Miller-Hyman system when it was written was just exactly this this concept. You have a complex business to business sell with multiple buyers, and you need to track the things that are important to those different buyers. Now we do this in different ways. Now we talk about personas. We do it in a lot of different ways. But if you have that somewhere in your CRM, if you want your team to do this, you have to build it in so that they have a place and a way to do that.
If I could add one more thing to this whole thing, because there's probably a lot of people who are out there listening and they're like, this is getting really dizzy. Like there's just a lot of stuff and there's so many different things that get put in. Here's the way that you go and solve for it. You isolate for specific variables and then attack that thing one at a time. And this is going to be really hard. But if you look at if you look at a vehicle, and if somebody was to do a cross section of that vehicle, it would look super, super complex. You probably would never want to drive that thing, because if you were someone who really had to understand exactly what every one of those switches did and how all of the stuff worked, it would make you go crazy. So same thing happens with your sales process, especially when you're thinking, and I know that opens up a whole other thing. And we've talked about process a couple of different times. There's a process from the buyer perspective, their decision making, the process for forecasting, the process that your rep takes. But if you look at all of those things and you try to combine them together and talk about them all at the same time, which ultimately happens when you don't use a common language that's defined inside an organization and have a culture built around that, then these things become really, really hard to solve. People get frustrated. And then ultimately someone walks out of a meeting thinking nobody knows what the hell they're talking about. And this is where we can help each other and lead together by asking good questions, putting information together, breaking things into smaller pieces, and then solving for the right things at the right time. So don't try to solve complex problems with complex solutions. Simplify, then start solving for the right things in the right order, because it's all super, super complicated. And the one that's going to be the most complicated is probably the one you're working on right now that you've not been able to solve for. And if you need help, you got a group of people who are happy to help you.
So Mike, let's talk about, how do I pick? There's all these different methodologies out there, and I open up my CRM and it has, all these different things. What do I do? What do I do? How do I pick? What are these things?
Yeah, here's one cool thing. You actually have a CRM.
That is a good step. But
right.
But I want to say a CRM is not a methodology. It is where you track your methodology and implement your methodology.
So if you have a CRM and it's been being used for a bit of time by a bunch of people, you probably have some data. So you have a CRM and you have some data. Some of that data can be pulled out and you can do something with it. And Bryn really has gotten into a lot of the AI tools and the resources that are out there. There are different things that you can do, and you can work to anonymize the data and do some things that will help you take whether it's structured or unstructured data, or unstructured structured data, because everybody changes the names of the headings on the top of them. You've got all of this data that's available to you. That's where I would start. I would start just looking at your data and say, given all the data that I have, what does good look like inside my system today? Not everybody else's system out there, because you can find 8 million different methods that someone will tell you worked in their environment, and you don't have their environment. So I'd first be happy that you have a CRM. Then I'd be happy that you have some data. Then I would take that data and I would work to do something with it. And if you don't know what to do with it, find someone who's operationally oriented, or a data analyst, or someone on the finance team who can help you inside your organization turn that into some meaningful information. And one of the cool things about doing that is now you're crossing other groups. So I would say don't follow somebody else's method or methodology right now. Start first with your stuff, figure it out. And then when you identify the patterns, start to say, okay, given this, how can we start to create more of what's working well and reduce the stuff that isn't working well? And then maybe start to ask some questions of people. For the ones who've had these challenges, what methods have you applied to help solve for those things? That's how I'd go through the process.
Yeah, but Mike, should I use MedPick or Spin or Challenger or Sandler or strategic selling or consumption selling?
I'd say, Liz, let's rewind the tape about 3 minutes, and start there and realize none of those things came up. Like, it's awesome that you like those things, and Liz and I are having fun with each other on this, because these are the conversations that happen inside organizations. And unfortunately, the mistake you're going to make is you're going to hire someone like me as a new VP of sales, and I'm going to come in with my method and I'm going to try to insert it in the first 90 days because that's the reason I was brought in there. And I'm going to completely blow up your entire organization because I've just taken what I learned when I was at Salesforce, when I was on the bus, not building the bus. And I saw things work on that side, which I know I shouldn't poke fun at Salesforce or poke fun at any of these other ones. Like, now Salesforce and Sandler are not going to sponsor the podcast, and I'm sorry for that. But yeah, so there are a lot of those characters that are out there, and if that's what you want, then go find a character expert and bring them in to help you do it. But what I think's funny, and what you'll have some fun with this. Look at Medic and then see how it evolved to what it is today. And then look at Spiced, and then look at Bant, and then look at Spin, and look at all of these ones, and find out how many of them are built based on actual selling or built based on the idea that they're going to sell an idea to train you on how to sell. Brent, thanks for the nonverbal laugh. No, I appreciate it. But some of them are in business to teach you how to sell. Sandler's in business to sell sales training. Shocking. Every time there's a problem with Sandler, you just need more training. Huh. That's a heck of a flywheel.
You know, one thing that we haven't said, and I know that this was following up on a joke, but one thing that we haven't said is when you're choosing all of these, and I'm going to say this because I'm not a sales consultant, right? But it is really important to have someone who is an expert in it, who can walk you through it, who can help you make sure that you're adhering to the parts that actually move things along and you aren't like being a stickler for language or something that doesn't really matter as much, and somebody that can help you learn how to coach your team up to it. I think, you know, that goes along with, I think you all pointed out, you need your CRM to support, you need to build out your CRM to support going through it, but you also have to have a person who can coach you through the whole thing. Again, I can say that because that's not what I do, and I'm not pitching from the stage here, but I do think it's really important. You may have it internally, right, in your sales management, or you may need to supplement, or you may have it with your sales management, but you still want to supplement because you want that person to help do some of the coaching so it doesn't feel as adversarial coming directly from you.
And I think there's an important point that Mike and Renee both alluded to, which is you can hire an expert in a methodology and have them help you implement it, or you can hire somebody who understands about different methodologies and help you figure out how to pick and choose what's most appropriate for you. And so again, while I was raised in Miller Hyman, I help people implement all kinds of things. Mike helps people implement all kinds of things. Bryn has created something that has nothing to do with Spin or Challenger, right? So as you're looking for help, make sure you're clear about the kind of help you need. If you have decided on your methodology that you're going to use, then find an expert and have them help you figure out all of the things you need to do to implement that methodology. And if you haven't picked, then find somebody who can help you figure out what you want to implement. What you got for me, Bryn?
So I'm going to, what you just said about how I'm doing it, and I'm going to go back to what Renee said, is I do have two pieces of Challenger in my methodology. The biggest one is lead to your solution, not with it. Absolutely one of the biggest ones. I have a gap selling by Keenan, which is the ask offer ratio. Make sure that you are mastering the ask offer ratio. When you ask your buyer to do something in return for your offer, they better feel like that was well worth whatever they invested, time, money, resources, right? So I am completely influenced by a lot of like one-pointers from books I've read, from methodology. And I mean, I can go on in all the different books, and I've grabbed this from this. David Newman, who is a marketing guy, talks about the best place to engage your buyer is before they know they have a need. And that was one of the very first pieces that came into my LinkedIn methodology, was from David Newman, and start engaging them before they have a need, so that you're the person they go to when you know that they're going to have it. So I do have a unique methodology, but it's because I believe I curated the best of the best and put it together. And by the way, my initial methodology around LinkedIn was when Aramark hired me, handed me the Challenger sale and blue sheets, green sheets, and gold sheets, and said, go build us something. So everything is really, in its core, is Challenger and Miller Hyman from Aramark. That's where it all began. They go, can you build us this? And I said, well, for the money you're paying me, I get to keep it once I build it. And they said, sure. So
So I want to add one more piece. Hang on one second. I want to add one more piece onto what Bryn just said about getting in front of your buyer before they know they need it. When you're thinking about your methodology, remember that your methodology may vary dramatically if the client is coming to you in the part of the process where you're qualifying them and they've pretty much already made a decision, or they're picking which solution they want, versus your methodology if you're going out and talking to people very early on. And I've actually had this conversation with clients where they're like, well, we need BANT. Well, you're not going to get BANT if they don't know they have a problem. They've got no budget. They've got no timeline. But that doesn't mean that we're not still helping to develop a solution. So that's another thing to really keep in mind as you're picking or designing or whatever you're doing with your methodology is, where is everything we do inbound? It's all coming in, they're ready to buy? Or are we out there, beating the bushes looking for rabbits that might dash out? Maybe not. Okay, Mike, you were going to say something, I think.
There are, many of us are fortunate to do what we do because we stand on the shoulders of giants. We've had so many different people who've come before us. A lot of what I do from a consultative sales perspective is driven by things I've learned from Liz's dad. So you talk about Miller Hyman, and you talk about Neil Rackman with Spin, or you talk about the Challenger sale. One of the things that people forget about is this whole, it's teach, tailor, take control. And I would shift, take control, and say lead. Teach, tailor, lead, help people move forward. So when you pull these things together, if you go out there and read, actually do some research yourself, go read, you can do what Bruce Lee said, which is take all of the best parts, remove the unnecessary ones, and make it all your own, right? And that's a kind of a butchered quote on him, but there's so many different ways to go through this stuff. Here's the thing you don't have to do, is you don't have to fail because you lack one or you don't know how to build one. There are resources that you can go to, including people and books, if you want to read LLMs, to go through and start to build out your own. So if you're not building your own, if you're not getting the things to move into more of a standard approach, that's all on you. Like, look in the mirror and figure out why the heck you're not leading your teams forward and you're not leading your organization forward. The one that I like on the BANT one, when people talk about it, like, we really just need our team out there banting. So how do you feel when you're banted? Or what did you think about how we work through our process? Did you feel like you got banted? Did I ever bant you through the process? Did I say, before we move along, let me make sure and validate you have the budget to afford me? Do you actually have the authority to make a decision?
The most insulting question ever.
It's ridiculous. Like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to build the foundation of my relationship with somebody on. I don't trust you. So I need to know who else I need to be talking to bring me into this process. I mean, come on, people. So anyway,
But I just want to say, where does BANT fit? Where does this idea fit? And it may not be in the conversation that you're having. Like, you don't BANT someone, you don't spin somebody up or let them feel spun, or whatever other way you want to talk about it. But if we need to make a decision about this proposal is going to take 10 hours of resource time to get it done, what requirements need to be in place for us to commit those resources to this? And that may be that we need to know that they have a reasonable amount of budget they can get in order to do it. It may mean that we're not going to do this until they have some sense of whether they're doing it in 5 years or in 2 years, right? We may put some criteria around it. But that doesn't mean that when you're having a conversation with someone, you make them feel, it's like walking into, you always see that walking into the fancy store. What was it? Pretty Woman. She walks into the fancy store and they decide she can't afford it, right? You don't get to decide whether they can afford it or not. But you may get to a point where you have to decide whether you're willing to use the resources to continue this relationship or not. And that's what we're talking about when we're qualifying. Go ahead, Bren.
Yeah. So I love that. And I love the pretty woman. I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that. I love that. But the problem with the things we're pointing out when we feel banted or we feel Sandlerized is because the sales rep leads with what the sales rep wants. We need to get to budget eventually, but you can't get to budget until you even know what the challenge and the solution. Like, I can't say, do you budget for what? When someone says to me, okay, well, really great, do you have a budget set aside for this? I don't even know what this is yet. Right. And so the challenge that I face when I feel Sandlerized is, when they start with things like, before we get started, if I say anything that you don't agree with, please let me know. So now you know what I'm doing? I'm thinking the whole time, what don't I agree with? I'm in the wrong mindset. Right? Because I want to get a fast no. Well, you're going to get lots of fast no's, but you're never going to get to what is the real challenge. And and when you say things like what keeps you up at night, now you've lost all credibility, because if you're here, let's talk about what that's keeping me up at night. And let's it's so backwards, right? Where the questions that we are walking into with some of these band Sandler is, what do I need first as a salesperson to qualify you, to identify if you're worth my time? And that's where it falls short, in my opinion. We have to go in there. And if I spend a little too much time talking about their challenge, the history that they've gone through to fix that challenge, the impact that this challenge is having or will have on their business, the risks that this is going to put on these individuals, not just the company, if they don't make this change. And if this is a priority, if I don't get to that, how can I ever talk about budget authority? And maybe I'm talking to the wrong person, but I will tell you, in my sales career, I have learned way more from the wrong person, so that when I got to the right person, I had enough information that I could give a solid recommendation. It's okay if the person you're talking to becomes your champion, but not the decision maker. And this is where my last thing I'm going to say is, we have to slow down the process to speed up the result. If we go at this to get our boxes checked, we're going to lose every single time.
Okay, so I just have to jump in and say this. Bryn is right. If you are only talking to one buyer, and if that buyer doesn't have authority, and therefore you can't talk to that buyer, and if that buyer won't let you talk to somebody else, then you can't make that sale. Slow down. If you have a business-to-business complex sale and you are only talking to one buyer, you are doing it wrong. So if you have a complex business-to-business sale, you may talk to many buyers. Don't cut off your nose because that buyer doesn't have the authority. Does that buyer have the ability to guide you through the sale? Does that buyer have enough information to help you figure out whether or not there's a fit? You guys have heard me talk about this too before. My guy selling in a complex sale is not the way you do it. There's no my guy. There is no buyer. There is no one person who is the buyer unless it's a simple sale. If it's a simple sale, then there is. Yes, Brent, go.
So one of my favorite things to teach salespeople to do is go into LinkedIn and search who used to be in the position of your buyers, of your 6.8 or your 10 or however many, and look at people that used to be in that company in that position. And you reach out to them. They are in a new company, and just say, hey, I'm working with folks inside of your old company. Can I ask you, how did you buy when you were there? They'll tell you. They love to talk about what they used to do. They can also become a prospect down the road. But when you talk to, and they have zero influence on that decision, but they could be the best person you ever talk to. because you can learn how do they make decisions, what are their criteria, why did they shut down the decision to fix this problem before. It's amazing what you can learn from people that have no stake in this, but have insights. They're my favorite to talk to.
When
Liz,
you get there, sorry, Renee.
I was just going to say, I'd like to point out a couple of things that you all have said that I think are very related. We've talked about the Frankensteining or blending, right? I prefer the word blend most of the times because most people can make it work, just like Bren did. The blending of things. We've talked about like why BANT is so negative to a lot of people because you're coming in hot with questions that aren't appropriate for the conversation you're in, right? A lot of these things. One of the reasons all of those things tend to happen is, how long has BANT been around?
A long time.
Long time.
Okay, so I don't need
40
the
years, 50, 40 years.
Okay.
Where's Todd Capone when you need him?
Okay, so we're talking something 40, 50 years old, right? The buying process has changed so much in that time period, is why there are still wonderful things inside of each methodology, but they don't quite fit right now. That is part of the problem. Liz, another piece that goes together with all of this, you pointed out, is you don't, if you're only talking to them once they're in the market, you're very, very often too late. They've already made up their mind. That didn't happen 40 or 50 years ago. They didn't have access to the information to be able to get that far. Now your buyers do, and they do it, and they're getting even further into it with AI. AI is going to move into the sales process quickly. Like, I can give you tons of examples for another time on how it did. I'm already using it in the sales process and it's making it less friction from the buyer side. Like, I'm bringing it to the conversation. It's the third party in the room, right? Like, this stuff is going to continue to happen. What I'm pointing out is a lot of these methodologies haven't evolved with, some have people that stay continue and update and make sure that it still applies, right? I regularly get into, when you pointed out these buyers coming in too late, I regularly get into it, work with a new client, and I will say, how long is your sales cycle? In B2B, arguably, almost every one of them will tell me 90 days or 6 months. I can 50-50. I'm going to hear 90 days or 6 months, right? And I will be able to go in generally in the first 30 days. I say, give me some examples of your top leads who come, people you would love more of that have come in, that have closed in 90 days or 6 months in the last 90 days or last 6 months. I can invariably pull them up in their system and prove that they have been, over 50% of them have been in their system for 2 years, right? They've been floating around in there for 2 years, trying to learn a little more in some way, right? So that's why these methodologies aren't matching up. The buyer's journey has changed greatly, and some of the methodologies have adapted to it and others haven't. That doesn't mean what they had doesn't have great parts, and it doesn't mean that newer things don't have great parts. You know, you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater on all of these things, but it is important to understand, to your point, when you're thinking about your sales process, when you're thinking about your needs, are you getting there early enough? Because some of this stuff that you're all saying about what you don't like about a methodology is you're putting things that are further down in the conversation way up front, because we need to be talking more up front, right? So I just wanted to point out that that's kind of a common thread that each of you are poking at from a different angle.
Mike, were you going to say something? Did you
forget what I
forget
was gonna
already?
say.
All
I
right.
forgot. Yeah.
Well, let's wrap this up then. And I think there are some important key points that came out of this, and Renee just really did a great job with that. When you're picking your methodology, pick the methodology that solves a problem that you're trying to solve. When you pick your methodology, make sure that it fits in with your company culture, your belief system. If you believe in win-win, then pick a methodology that's win-win. If you believe in, having a fast-paced, aggressive kind of sales process, then, and that's the culture of your company, then Find something that fits it. Don't try to cram something that is not native to your culture into it unless you want to change the culture of your company. Make sure that you have considered things like the complexity of the sales cycle, the length of the sales cycle, all of those kinds of things that could impact it, and find the people that can help you figure out what it is you need. And remember that you can modify things to work better in your world. You don't have to take it, the way it is on the menu. You can actually say, I'd like it without mayo, please. Right. So find what works for you and then find a process to get it implemented into your company. And again, if you have questions about sales methodology, any of us would be happy to answer your questions. And again, if you have not connected with us on LinkedIn, please do that and engage with us. Ask us. We're happy to engage with you and answer your questions. So thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. Okay, you guys, let's do a quick one. The next one is when, what to do to adapt, and why. Chris, do you want to lead that part about how do you figure out what you're adapting in your sales process, or do you guys want to do something different?
I'm going to jump because that's okay. So you guys have fun. Thank you very much. I enjoy this so much. I learned so much. Bye, guys.
You guys good with that next topic? Chris, that was your idea. Do you want to lead that?
Sure.
Okay. All right. And then, Renee, I think this is a really good time to talk also about how do you adapt it into the marketing. I think that's really important. So,
yeah,
all
so
right.
you don't have two different experiences. Yeah. 2 marketing matches.
Yeah. Okay, you ready?
It's nice when it happens.
Welcome to the Sales SOS podcast. I'm Liz Hyman, your host, and I'm here with your Sales SOS podcast crew, Renee Bigelow, Chris Bowen, and Mike Simmons. And we have been talking in the last couple of episodes about methodology. And we've had a little bit of spin and a little bit of Miller Hyman and a little bit of Sandler and a little bit of MedPick. But what we've been talking about is how to sort of pick the right methodology for your company. And now we want to talk a little bit about maybe you don't have to order it off the menu. Maybe you can pick and choose. Maybe you can make some alterations. Maybe you can make some changes. And so Chris is going to start us off on this conversation about how do you adopt it? What do you adapt? When do you adapt? Get us started, Chris.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the first thing is if you take something wholesale, it may work, it may not, right? You need to be able to understand where you're getting hung up if it's not working, right? Because it's probably not the whole process is bad. It's a portion of the process. Well, why is it bad? Is it because of the way you're choosing to go about it? Is it bad because it does not fit your sellers or your buyers? And being able to understand where those problems are actually occurring, and then what would have to change, what has worked in the past, because maybe you didn't have, before you had a methodology that you were following, you sold stuff ideally, so you knew there were pieces of this that worked. How do you then take those pieces and say, okay, we don't want to throw everything out, we want to bring those things back in, and that may adapt the methodology a little bit. At least that's how I tend to look at it, is just you got to figure out where the real problem is and why is that a problem. As we talked about in some of the other episodes, the other thing you have to look at is if you are going to scale at some point to a different sales process, a different sales cycle, is this going to help build that bridge to get you there as well? But don't put the cart before the horse on that one, because otherwise you're building something that's inappropriate for today.
Can you give us some examples? Like, what are some things that you've actually gone in and said, hey, this is how the methodology is. We're not going to do this. This is what we're going to do.
Oh, like I've in some of the places with certain pieces of methodology, they'll ask for a bunch of different information up front. If, like, as we were talking about BANT earlier, but it could fit a number of different processes. And some of that information you're just not going to have very early in the sales cycle. You might have hints to it, you might have some thought about it, but it's probably not necessarily going to be accurate. And so, how should you be looking at that? It goes back to a little bit of our CRM conversation from probably a year ago, where are you building in with the methodology basically like a bunch of required fields in your CRM that are due at these particular steps that aren't appropriate for the way you tend to sell or your customers tend to buy, and you're creating this um, organizational administrivia bottleneck that doesn't serve anybody's purpose. um, I, as I've said, I think I've mentioned this before, we combined CRMs at a previous company, as the parent absorbed our smaller entity. One of the fields that they had that was required to create an opportunity was, what are the service lines that are going to be involved? Service line list was 570 potential options, many of which sounded very much alike. And you're expecting that people are going to know that after their initial conversation. It made no sense. An average sales cycle at this company was probably 7.5, 8 months. So you got time, but you're asking somebody on the very first step, before they can even create the opportunity, they have to know this information. It's a bad use of your CRM, but it's also, what methodology were you trying to follow that may have led you down that path? You have to look at these things and look at what works in your reality, not what works theoretically in a book.
Yeah. I have to say one of my least favorite things about CRMs is when they make you put in a close date when you have absolutely no idea.
Yeah,
Why is that? Hold on.
Go ahead,
I
Mike.
want to hear more about that. Let's go through that. What's wrong with estimating a close date?
Oh, well, if everybody understands that it's an estimate and that it isn't real, and you have some way to differentiate between an estimated and an actual, then that's fine. If you all agree that if we put it in and it's in prospecting, which I don't know how you can have a close date in prospecting because you're prospecting.
Right.
So if you, right,
Yeah.
or if you're in qualifying and they haven't even figured out if they need this solution or not. So I can say our typical sales cycle is 12 months. So I'm going to make it 12 months, but then you need to have a way to indicate in the CRM that you guys all agree on that this is fictitious. This is
yeah.
not real.
Well,
It's
I'll give you a great example from my world this past week. Um, I had a account that was given to me, that from somebody who is no longer here, and within that account, they had an opportunity. That opportunity was slated to close in August. This opportunity was originally created in 22, right? And then I get pinged by somebody who says, "Hey, this thing is scheduled to close next month. Um, where are we at on this?" I've literally had this account moved over to me for 2 days. I don't know anybody in this account, so I don't know if this is real. But if it's been around since 22, I'm going to guess that it's not. So I'm going to close it. Now, is that the right action? Maybe. It might not be. It might be a legit opportunity that they were working, and maybe it got delayed, maybe there were no notes or anything else, all sorts of other issues. But it's like, but you're asking me because somebody else in the organization is looking at this and says, "Well, I need you to update this," and I'm like, "Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close it, but I'm not, but I'm going to chase down anything else I can find out on this and see if it's a real opportunity, and then I'll open up a new one." But it's these little things that are like, you force this person to put in all these other data points that weren't real, and then they kept sliding it and sliding it and sliding it, and nobody ever forced that person to close it. Is really what, if you ask me, what happened. Like, nobody had the conversation like, how do we know that this is a legitimate opportunity? Who are we talking with? Have we identified that this is an actual problem that they realize is an actual problem, or was this just a fishing expedition?
Yeah. So here's something to think about. If you're struggling inside your business on the close date piece, and I get so number one, do what Liz talked about there, which is have some general agreement that a close date is a forecast of something that's going to happen in the future based on given information that you have at a given point in time. It is not a guarantee. Like there are no guarantees until the deal has been signed. Then it's now past tense, it's moved into closed one, and now you have the official close date. That's the signature date when the deal was signed. But the close date on an opportunity that's in some kind of process is going to be some point in the future and can be based on compelling events. And a compelling event can be something like a fiscal year, as there might be management-based objectives or MBOs that someone's going to be held accountable to getting something done before the end of that fiscal year, or it could be a quarter, or it could be any number of things, anything that's agreed to with the customer. And this is where qualification becomes really important. Anything that's agreed to with the customer. The reason I don't like to use prospecting as a stage
And
in
this is a whole nother
CRM.
conversation that
I
Mike and
know.
I could have for hours,
And
but go ahead.
But the reason why I don't like to use it is because you've not validated that there's a real opportunity. It's like me saying, you know what, I'm going to add Christy Brinkley to my prospect list. I've never met Christy Brinkley. And there I go. I'm demonstrating my age. I've been married now for 27 some odd years, but like, what am I? I'm prospecting. Where do I put that in? How do I forecast something like that? Well, if I meet someone and I sit down next to them at a bar and they don't get up, there's a chance that something might happen. So like that's a real opportunity rather than the other one, which is hope and prayer. So I think there's some things that you kind of go through, and I know that's a little bit of a crude way to look at it, but there's some things you can go through where you say, what are the minimum requirements that we need in order for something to be in as an opportunity? And for me, there's amount, there's stage, and there's timeline or date.
And that's already, so in my mind, that's already qualified. So this is where you have to really understand your sales process and and what you're measuring. So, and this is, Mike, we should do this again and have this conversation again, because
Always.
this is why so many companies think their sales cycle is 3 months, because they do not put it in until it is a qualified deal that they are writing a proposal for. But actually, it was a 2-year sales cycle and they have no way to measure it. So, but again, it doesn't matter which way you do it. There isn't one that's right or wrong. What is going to work for your company to drive the right activities, to collect the right information, to help you predict accurately? You need to figure these things out. What is it you want to measure? So Mike and I have a totally different philosophy about that. And there are different ways to measure it, using the CRM differently to do different things. So, but anyway, but this is why process is so important in knowing what your methodology is. Go ahead, Renee.
Okay, so definitely different points of view on this. I think a lot of it comes from the perspective of the seat you sit in, right? I'm going to do what we know I always do. I'm going to flip it, and I'm going to talk about from the customer buyer journey, right? Which is all of the things that you both pointed out, and what Chris talked about. Here's what I see often: you drive a bunch of people into their buyer journey, right? And they float around in there for a while they figure out if they have capacity for change inside their organization. If it's B2B, like I don't care what you're selling in B2B, if it's not like a pen or a widget or like an office supply, essentially anything beyond that means somebody's got to change some process in there, right? So if it's in B2B, they're often sitting around trying to figure out if they have the capacity to do some change. There's only so much an organization can handle at once. Do they do this project or that project? They're trying to learn. They float around in those orbits for a while, right? So in their buyer journey, they're already figuring out their problems, figuring out if your solution meets their problems, all of these things on their own. And then if you wait till there's a qualified opportunity, then they're already 75, 90% of the way through that journey before they're talking to sales, right? So if your sales process and methodology picks up there. In today's modern buying environment, you could be missing a massive amount of opportunity. You are throwing out a lot of really good leads who have come to your universe, who are interested in you, who know about you, which is a huge challenge in today's market, right? By not nurturing them. So you need to figure out whose responsibility are those leads. And this is where a lot of sales and marketing alignment falls out of whack, right? Is that marketing's responsibility until they are all the way ready to be a qualified lead? Well, if so, who's going to have those discussions that help them educate themselves and get better instead of a one-to-many, more one-to-one? Are you encouraging some sort of connection where they can start talking to somebody to get a little bit better idea? Because whoever is educating them the best, whoever's helping them understand their problems and solve the problems, is going to win the business, right? So if you're just relying on it to be this one-to-many blasting of information, you've still got risk, right? But you at least need to define, is marketing handling all of those leads all the way up to the point that we internally feel they are a qualified lead? And if we are really high on that bar, that threshold of what is qualified, right, they're going to buy in the next 90 days. If we say that, right, if that's one of the things we say, because I often hear that, like the intent needs to be high, there needs to be a deadline, there needs some of the things you've already brought up. If it's that, then you need to be very clear that that's where your team starts, right? But again, I will tell you, there's a ton of research out there that says that the brand and the team that is talking to them the earliest is the one that wins the business. So you have to figure out what that buyer's journey is and how not every sales team can talk to a lead in the very beginning. Some people have incredible demand and there's no way they could talk to every person who's coming in. Some people are starved for every single lead and they really should be talking to every single person who pokes their head in their website, right? If there's any possible way, they should. Anybody who comes to a webinar, it depends on that, right? What your capacity is, but you want to match that sales capacity and that ability to track the steps and move people through to conversion as early in the buyer's journey as you can. So you want to match that up. And then you have to, on either side, however you determine it, you have to make sure that the experience the buyer is having matches when they've gone from like their marketing experience and into their sales experience. Another problem I often see is somebody will be going all the way along. You set this really high threshold for when they're considered a qualified sales lead. They come in, they meet this really high threshold. First thing a salesperson does is back them up on their journey and start trying to do things that they've already gone through that whole process, and they're frustrated, right? Because they've already done all this education on their own. They've already done all these different things. So you want to back up and like do a discovery call? I'm like all the way ready to choose a vendor, right? So you have to make sure that you're matching your experience on both sides of that buyer's journey. And I'll stop and let both of y'all, because I've kind of thrown a lot in here.
And I just want to say one thing, and I want to throw it back to Chris and Mike, and then we got to wrap up. And that is that, again, what's really important is understanding, do you have an inbound team? Are they only taking calls that are coming in? Or do you have a BDR team that is going out and getting ahead of the sale? Or do you have somewhere in between or some combination of those, and making sure that whatever your process is and however you map it, that you're accommodating whichever of those is the way your organization works. Mike, Chris, any last words of wisdom? I just totally shut Mike down, by the way. I'm like, yeah, you're talking. I just stopped you. Mike and I have this discussion all the time.
What I would say is, if you're going to force somebody, this is going back before Renee spoke. If you're going to force somebody into putting a close date when they put in an initial opportunity, do you understand what your average sales cycle length is at a minimum? And it needs to at least be that. And then be able to deal with it from that perspective. And again, understand that based on the stage within the process that it's in, whether or not that is a real date or a fanciful narrative at that point, right?
A placeholder date.
As you move closer to the actual close date and further down the sales process, that close date should become more clear.
Exactly.
Mike, what you got for us?
Yeah, I mean, I think the
I'm so sorry, Mike.
It's not, it's, well, we should absolutely have the conversation around process and some of that other stuff and really layer into all of those three perspectives. What happens from a buyer perspective, like their decision-making process, and how does that change? What happens from a sales process for forecasting perspective? How do you actually execute inside your business and grow? What do you want to design from a customer success standpoint? And then how do your reps go and do those things? So all of those things factor in. The challenge really happens, and we've hit on this over the course of the last 2 hours, is when people make assumptions around what certain things mean or how certain things work. And assumptions suck. They get in the way of being able to do things. The three questions that anybody can ask in order to help address some of the complexity that's been highlighted throughout this, specifically from the perspective of the buyer, which I know is where, and the customer, which is where Renee focuses, is think about this through three lenses. Who has the problem? Who is impacted by the problem? Who cares about the people who have or are impacted by the problem? And if you can answer those three questions and know who those people are, then now you can talk with those folks inside a business and gain perspective. And when you gain perspective, then you can start to help people the way that we want to help people as sales professionals, as revenue professionals who help people do the things they want to do better and faster. So thanks. I enjoyed the conversation. I love the debates with Liz, and I will die on the hill that if you put an opportunity into a system and it doesn't have a date, I don't even know what we're talking about. Like,
So I want to wrap up with just one more thing. So why does an organization put a sales methodology in place? And I'm going to share two statistics with you. One is that 80% of American companies cannot predict revenue within 25%. So that means if you have, I think this is right, the statistician in me keeps questioning this. If you have a $40 million company, you don't know if you're going to make $50 million or $30 million next year. Here's a second.
That tracks with what I see in the wild.
Here's a second statistic that is flabbergasting. That 50% of VPs or CROs or whatever the title is do not feel confident about their predictions, about their forecasts. So what that tells us is that one, either there's some major economic event that is making everybody's world, turning everybody's world upside down, but more often than not, it is that they do not have a methodology in place that helps them manage, guide, and predict outcomes. So that's how you know the methodology, when you just really have no idea what the result of your sales effort will be this year.
if you were one of those 80%, call one of us, please. Like, if you don't call us, you're going to lose a job, and your people are going to lose jobs, and your customer, you're not going to be able to pay payroll. Like, could you imagine that kind of gap?
Actually,
I've
Mike,
not seen that
I
data,
actually see that huge gap. I see it most in fast-growing companies. Like, I see that
Okay.
gap of knowledge and projection in fast-growing companies the most. Not where it's slower or things where there's attrition. People are paying really close attention, right?
But I will tell you, I see it in companies that have been around for 30 years.
Yeah.
And they still have no idea what to expect. They set goals, they're not hit. Nobody knows why. And remember, 50% of salespeople, 60% of salespeople in this country will not hit their revenue goal this year. They will not hit their sales goal. 60%.
So can I give us a kind of a little parting note on some of this? Mike mentioned this in one of our earlier episodes about if you have a CRM, great. A lot of people still don't. But if you have a CRM and you get data in there, it's going to help you choose your methodology and everything. The data is what helps you with all of this, right? And I bring that up to say, everything we've said, there will be some people who are like, we need to do this yesterday, right? And they rush into it and try to do everything, think they're going to get an answer tomorrow. But the reality is, if you don't have data, if you haven't had a methodology, if you haven't done all of these things and you have no idea what your projections are now, you're not going to know them next quarter, right? To an exact percent. You're going to have to build into this So we talked about shrinking the change or whatever. Pick an area, get your data in, start somewhere and build into it. And over the course of, I generally think over the course of 2 years, you get a pretty good, you get your team on board, you get your data in place, you can start projecting. You all may have a different timeline, but I've seen generally it takes about 24 months for that to kind of sink in. I just think it's nice for people to have a little bit of a frame of reference for all this stuff we're talking about.
Depending on sales cycles, you could do it a lot faster too. Like that's one of the cool things that fits into what Renee is talking about and what we've been talking about. And it's, talking cliches a lot today, but it's, what's that, the old saying or the Chinese proverb, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is today. Okay. So go out and, if you don't have the CRM, if you don't have the data, start planning today, and don't make it overly complex. It does not have to be more complex than when you first started, like a spreadsheet first, and then with some simple things. Use that role reflective model that we've talked about before, that whole what, so what, now what, when looking at the data. And you can move a lot faster. And if you use the whole iterative approach kind of thing, you're going to learn, you're going to have feedback loops, and you're going to start to adjust really quick. And you can move a lot faster than it would have taken us a number of years ago to do the same things. So start working now, and you can do this in the next 90 days and get prepared for your business planning for next year, and then be in a much better position for so that your team is hitting realistic numbers. You actually go in with a plan rather than, oh, well, I think we can grow by 20% across all the regions.
Mike, I have to ask, you really think you can start with a brand new CRM, pick a sales methodology, train a team on a sales methodology, and get to accurate projections in 90 days?
I can do it in 90 days. Yep.
I can name that tune in 3 notes.
90 days. 90 days will completely shift things. Yep. 90 days. Now, if you tell me that your sales cycles are 6 to 12 months long, it's going to take a lot longer than that, right? Because you're dealing with things that need to go that route. But yep, Renee, it can be done, and I've done it.
And so here's the really important thing here. If you have a 2-year sales cycle, start asking for help before you run out of runway, because you need a 2-year runway to have a grand impact. Make sure you know how much runway you have and ask for help before you run out. We're here. Call us. Seriously. I'm happy to have a conversation. Mike's happy to have a conversation. Chris, Renee, Daryl, and Bryn, anytime. If you guys have a question, you think you're running out of runway, call us. Let's talk about what are some of the things that you can do. Hey, you guys, thanks for joining us. Let me move me over here. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Sales SOS podcast. I'm so glad you joined us. I hope you are a little bit wiser about sales methodologies than you were before we started this 4-part series. Have a great day, everybody, and happy selling.